Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Joining us, as always, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, and the recipient of an awfully sweet introduction by Jennifer Van Laar, the managing editor over at RedState.com on Twitter. It was really sweet. I was sort of unexpected. So tell us a little bit about what she was talking about.
Well, she just said I was the greatest thing in the world. No.
Well, that much is true. We know that.
She had asked me to figure out a way to draw on my long years. I think 57 now in the news business and 80 on the planet, and share some memories that might shed light on things that are going on today. I kind of like that idea, so I came up with a proposal, and she had it, and she bought it, and last week we ran the first one on July 4th. At just an occasional sharing of memory and perspective on maybe how things have changed, or how good they were, or how not so good they were in the past.
Well, see, and I think that this is a great perspective. And I know that next week, you're going to have something on historical, I don't know, literacy maybe is the right word for it.
Literacy.
But I think that, first off, we've been doing this together for 15 years, right? So, we often talk about this type of stuff, but I think it's good to have it in a like an intentional manner. I'm looking forward to this over at RedState.com.
Yeah. It's outside the paywall, so everybody can get it. And it's kind of fun, actually. I've got a whole packet of ideas. It's just a question of finding the time to do them. But we're taping the next one soon, and we can talk about that next week.
We can talk about that next week. We got stuff to talk about this week. I'm going to throw a curveball at you. This is something that's just coming across right now. Andrew's like, oh, great. Yeah. I never hit the curve when I was a kid. So, but I'm going to throw it. That ended my Little League career.
Really?
Once I realized I couldn't hit a curveball, because I was 14 years old and I was getting into that part where they're starting to throw curveballs, and they say, okay, I'm done. I think I'll help out. It's going to help out. But Turkey has agreed to back Sweden's entry into NATO. Now, they've been holding this thing up for months, I think almost a year now.
Yeah.
And my guess is, from the initial report on this, that Turkey got two things it really wanted out of this. One was an accelerated entry into the EU, and the second was F-16s. I'm not sure if that's the case or not. By the time this gets published, people will already know. But just in the first blush here, it had to be something like that, right? Erdogan was not going to let this thing go. Erdogan was sort of the Rod Blagojevich, right, of NATO.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's perfect.
He had an effing valuable thing, and he wasn't going to let it go.
That's right. And he's playing both sides. He has Putin building him a nuclear reactor. He bought from Putin a very sophisticated air defense system, and he wanted to buy F-35s, and Trump said no, because you could share that with the Russians and they'll figure out how to spot F-35. So I guess there's something special about F-16s. I guess there's a lot of them around, and it makes for a lot of jobs in the States. Erdogan's alleged reason was Sweden wasn't being hard enough on anti-Muslims. We get past that BS and get Sweden in there, and that'll be a good thing. That'll make 32 countries.
Yeah, my understanding is that the F-35 thing was just a non-starter. They weren't going to send them.
Yeah, absolutely, non-starter.
But the F-16s were negotiable. Now, you've got to kind of dig around for this. But as I was, right before I was going on the air, I was trying to put this thing up in the headlines, and I was, I wasn't doing a Google search. I was doing a DuckDuckGo search, and I found because I've kind of given up on Google and to a certain extent Bing. But there was an article that came up from I think it was called the Cyprus Post or the Cyprus Mail. So from Cyprus, not Cyprus, California, where I lived for a time. Nice suburb. No, this is like the island of Cyprus that has big issues with Turkey.
Yeah.
And they're quoting Bob Menendez, a pretty influential Senate Democrat for the moment, depending on his latest scandal, saying that he has basically a veto on the sale of F-16s to Turkey. And if Biden goes around him, there will be consequences to this. So my guess is that Biden has to have known this. Blinken has to have known this. My guess is that they probably got enough support from Senate Republicans to cut this deal. To sideline Menendez on this thing, but Menendez is not going to be happy.
Yeah, there are several pains in the behinds in the Senate. He's one of them.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna present an obstacle to this deal. But this is, and the other thing too is you're saying that Erdogan has played both sides of the street, but Putin is not going to be happy about this. I don't know if Putin maybe thinks it was inevitable anyway, but it wasn't inevitable before the invasion of Ukraine. In fact, Finland and Sweden had been, certainly they've been neutral
for centuries.
Centuries. And Sweden and Erdogan was holding this thing up, and I think in part to curry favor with Putin. And I'm curious as to how that relationship is going to go now that.
Yeah. Well, I think the main one was Finland, and that as the is it the longest or the second longest border with Russia, and they're in. That's a done deal. Erdogan, you're right, absolutely. He's playing both sides. He's selling drones to Ukraine. He's getting aid from the EU over for migrants, and threatens. In fact, he did this, I think, a year or two ago. Threatens to just let the migrants head for Europe if they don't give Turkey more aid.
Yep.
Bottom line, you can say, what the hell is Turkey doing in a North Atlantic Treaty Organization?
Yes.
And the reason is because it has the Incirlik Air Force Base. And so that's how they got in. Turkey's been in, I think, since 1952, which is year 3 of NATO. So it's it's a done deal, as silly as it might seem on paper.
Well, and now they're going to enter the EU, which to me is really interesting. Because there's, that brings in all sorts of things about refugee handling, because there was a lot of conflict between Turkey and the EU over how the EU was handling refugees. Turkey wanted it to be more wide open. So it's going to be really interesting, because I forget what it's called. It's a German name, but there's free border crossings within the EU. And that means that people coming from Turkey can cross over into Greece, right? Because Greece is the bordering nation, without, I forget what it's called. It's something zone. It begins with an S. I'd have to look it up, and I'm not going to do it right at the moment. But there's all sorts of really interesting things if the EU membership was part of this deal. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Well, if it isn't now, it probably will be. That guy's a real bargainer.
Oh yeah. All right. So speaking of bargains, the New York Times. There you go. The New York Times 2 years ago bought up The Athletic. It was a sports website for the bargain price of $500 million, which, if I recall correctly, was twice as much as the New York Times got for itself when Carlos Slim bought it. I thought that was $250 million. Could be wrong about that. But
Carlos was alone with stock as the collateral. They didn't really sell it. The family will never sell it. But yeah. Well, and The Athletic is a subscription site. I've seen one or two stories, and they seem to be fairly in depth. But that's a tenuous situation. The New York Times, as much as you may not like its wokeness, in its news, news qualities, is actually very good, has been for a long time. And I get it because of the foreign news coverage, which
Right.
is unsurpassed.
It's very good.
And to buy The Athletic, well, they got the athletic reporters, but the athletic reporters then started touting to sports organizations that they were New York Times reporters. And the New York Times reporters were getting frozen out because their corporate brothers were squeezing and taking the New York Times press passes and all that stuff. So that was something they had to address. But it's a strange way to address it, is to can the people that have been doing your sports for so long. They got Pulitzer Prizes, Dave Anderson and what's his name? Red Smith, was it?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so they're shutting down the sports desk because they've got The Athletic, and they're reassigning the reporters out to other parts of the newspaper, presumably maybe a few of them to The Athletic itself. But I mean, that's strange. I mean, that's odd.
It is very strange. Obviously, it's part of the tremors that news organizations are going through these days, and losing jobs. I think the LA Times is cutting more jobs, and it's sad. It's the gradual, what do you call it, decrepitization of the modern American newspaper.
No, I think that's right. Although it's good news for athletic supporters. I'm sorry. I'm
12
years old.
You
sorry,
had
I'm 12 years old.
That
counts as one of my jokes of the day today.
Ed, please stop jockeying us around.
Oh, yeah. I'm jockeying for position here. I know. That's two of my jokes of the day. All right. I'm 12 years old. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just found that very interesting and almost inevitable. I mean, if you pay $500 million for a subscription website that's based on sports, how do you justify spending the money to support that and your own sports desk? I mean,
the Athletic is subscription, but they're losing money on it. So yeah, they gotta squeeze everything together somehow.
Yeah, they overpaid for it. Is basically, I think,
and they paid $1 billion for the Boston Globe, and then ended up selling it for
$70 million.
$70 million.
$70 million. It was $70 million.
I was a stockholder in those days, and I voted against buying the Boston Globe because I knew it was a loser. Sure enough.
I think it was 25 years later they sold it for $70 million. So yeah, that was so yeah. I find this all very strange, but
it is strange.
I know. All right, let's turn our attention to the political scene here, because I want to talk a little bit about the interview that Maria Bartiromo did with Ron DeSantis on Sunday morning. Fox, I don't know. I'm assuming it was Fox News Channel. I think she does the Sunday show on Fox News Channel, but she's usually on Fox Business. And she did about a 13-minute interview with DeSantis, and I actually thought the interview was really good. I know that she was asking questions she's asking questions about something I'm about to criticize, but it's her job to ask those questions to allow the interview subjects to respond to these things, because, and I'll get to what it is in a second. And I thought she did a good job of that. She was maybe a little too high tension, I think, when she was doing this, but I think that's part of Romo's style. But she asked a series of questions about policy, and DeSantis was very well prepared for these. And it wasn't easy policy stuff. It was, stuff that is actually, pretty contentious. And then she said, political playbook is saying that you have people in your campaign that says your campaign is in crisis, it's near collapse. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, what do you say to that? How do you correct this? Ron DeSantis laughed and he says, it's a narrative. This is nothing more than a media narrative. We just broke records on fundraising, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's because the polls are stagnant, basically. They're not changing much. So legit question. He had a good answer for it. I'd encourage people to watch the whole interview because it's very good. But, you know, half of it was policy, half of it was horse race stuff. Well, it's a horse race, and that's legit too.
Yeah.
Good for Bartiromo. She did a good job.
Well, she's good. I've always admired her, and she seems pretty straight. And the narrative, DeSantis is absolutely right. The narrative is that he's in crisis. Now, I wrote about this last winter when other people started getting in the race. The media has to have something happening in order to write about news. News is new. And they're going to create a story one way or another. And the way they do that is to make it into a horse race. Oh, he's ahead at the quarter mile. Oh, now she's slipping. And they're going to do that, and people will react. And that's the way they get the clicks. Oh, this has changed. Nothing has changed, and nothing will change. I don't see anything in the polls changing until shortly after the Fox News debate in late August in Milwaukee, which DeSantis says he's going to be at. I imagine the others will be too. Trump is playing footsie, and we'll see whether he goes or not. I think he will. Then once enough people, it'll be August before Labor Day, so you know you won't have the big crowds watching, but you'll get a fair amount of things for the media and the viewers to chew on, and we'll see who does well and who doesn't. Remember, Kamala Harris started out in the Democratic debates in 19? She started out poorly and ended up dead in the water. And she quit before there were any votes cast. So there will be a weeding out process having to do with largely fundraising. The qualifications for the August debate are not insignificant. The big names obviously are already in. Nikki Haley, Trump, DeSantis. They've already met it. Some of them are. You've got to have 400 donors in 21 states or something. You got to have X amount of money. You've got to be 1% at least in X polls that Fox lists. And you've got to take a vow that you will, one, not go on any other debate other than the RNC debates, and that you will support the eventual nominee.
Right.
Some of them have hedged on that and saying, well, we'll see and all that. But bottom line, things that will, I think, be when things actually get started.
Well, right. And so this is my point. You take a look at the polls, and polls are basically telling us what we already knew, and they haven't really changed. I mean,
right.
So I took a look at Real Clear Politics, which is a great place to go if you want to see, you know, national
bigger picture,
bigger picture stuff, right? And I take a look as far back as they go, which is a year. All right, so this is even before DeSantis, you know, won the governorship. It's before Trump jumped into the race officially. It's before the indictments started coming down. And the race is about the same place as it was a year ago, which is that Trump was, being the incumbent president, had a pretty substantial lead, and Ron DeSantis was dominating the not Trump lane, right? Which is what we expected. Now, when he ended up getting, and when he ended up winning in Florida by a landslide, DeSantis got a pretty good bump at Trump's expense. When Trump got indicted by Alvin Bragg, he got a pretty good bump at DeSantis's expense, but we're back to basically status quo, and it hasn't changed. The deal in this primary, and this is the way people have to look at it, is that, and this is what DeSantis sort of said too to Bartiromo, is that this is going to be about a choice. It's going to be whether or not you stick with Trump or change directions. If you stick with Trump, there's only one person in the stick with Trump lane, and that's Donald Trump, right? There's what, 10 or 11 people now in the not Trump lane, and DeSantis is blowing him out of the water. I mean, there isn't anybody who's above 6 points in that poll, and he's, at 20, 21, 22 very consistently in terms of an average of national polling. Now, state polling is different. DeSantis actually looks better in state polling, which is another thing that he was trying to talk about. But even that's kind of beside the point at the moment. You have to get to the point where people are actually going to have to make the choice. Do we change directions and go with somebody who's going to, take the Republican Party into the future, or do we stick with the past with Donald Trump? And that's not an easy choice for people to make. And people could very well decide that they want to stick with Trump. That's what Ron DeSantis has to do, but he's going to have to do that over the next 6 months. And he knows that. Yeah. So, it's hard to, people are comparing it to the collapse of John McCain. And look, I was around when McCain collapsed, okay? I was the beneficiary of John McCain's collapse, because when John McCain's campaign collapsed and all the money went away, John McCain went to the bloggers to regain his relevance. And I was one of the people that he went to. I got an exclusive, which means in media terms, exclusive means nobody else was on the call but you. Get an exclusive interview with John McCain, which was really cool. Great get for me. And it was a great interview. I enjoyed talking with the guy. As soon as he regained his footing and regained his donors and regained his fundraising, I never heard from those guys again. Andrew's waving at the camera. Yeah, bye-bye. And that was fine. I understood that, So this isn't a McCain collapse. This is not a Bill Clinton collapse. And what the Clinton campaign was calling bimbo eruptions in 1991 and 1992. This is, Ron DeSantis raising $20 million in half of a quarter officially as a candidate, and his super PAC, Never Back Down, raising on its own $67 million in that same time period. Well, in the full second quarter, I should say, because they were in operation the whole time. And technically $150 million, but that was because DeSantis transferred in the remaining $83 million from his gubernatorial campaign that he still hadn't spent. So this is a campaign that's raising a lot of money, and he's still getting a lot of media attention. I mean, I would be happy to interview Ron DeSantis, but this is not a guy who's getting shut out by the media because he's irrelevant. I mean,
you're absolutely right. Well, DeSantis's challenge is that, for instance, John McCain was much better known than Ron DeSantis is nationally. Now, right. Ron DeSantis has the start of a national reputation as a very effective conservative governor who won by a landslide, who had a big fight with Disney. And the media wants Donald Trump. So they're going to jump on any bad news that they can find or concoct about Ron DeSantis. And now Donald Trump, remember back in 15 and 16, he can make a big splash by being Donald Trump. Boisterous, explosive, name calling, and that's going to get a lot of media attention. He got over $2 billion in free media back then. And that's the way he made an instant reputation. Well, Ron DeSantis has to make one the old-fashioned way, like that stock firm, by earning it.
Yeah. And E.F. Hutton was it? When E.F. Hutton talked, oh no, yeah, it was E.F. Hutton, yeah, because, or was it Smith Barney?
I don't remember, but but you've got to build a reputation, and he's doing it. He's going everywhere. His wife is going everywhere. He's generally avoided the bigger media outlets. He'll have to do them pretty soon. Maria, I think, was the biggest one that he's done so far. But over time, allowing people to come to know him. Sometimes a lot of people consume the news. They're walking through the living room, they get 15 seconds. They see something interesting, they'll pause for another 15 seconds, and then they'll walk away. So this takes time for him to create, through repetition, his own reputation as an effective, eloquent spokesman for the conservative cause, who could plausibly become commander-in-chief. Now, compared to Joe Biden, that's not hard to do. Compared to Donald Trump, it's hard to do because of all the shouting. People know Donald Trump. He has a very strong record in office. You have to. He'd like you to assume he'll do the same thing next time, but there will be no club of a second term hanging over his head. He'll be a freewheeling freelancer in his second term, so there's no obligation. The first term for Ron DeSantis, he'd be trying to set himself up for a second one, so he'd have to deliver. And Donald Trump did in his first term. Excuse me. So this is a very tedious, long-term thing for DeSantis to create a reputation. And his first big chance will be on the Fox debate. And if he screws up there, then he's in trouble.
Yeah. No, I agree. But I mean, this is a guy who's a pretty seasoned Paul too. So I don't expect them to.
Absolutely. And he was on a SEAL team. So if you can get on a SEAL team, I think you can handle the pressure of a TV show.
Yeah. This is a guy who knows his way around a debate stage. I don't anticipate him blowing it. He just still may not make the sale.
But think about it. No, yeah. But think about it. So if Donald Trump participates, and if he blows off, and DeSantis, obviously they're going to ask him for his reaction. Well, if he's measured and reserved with and I'm sure they'll be rehearsing this, a couple of clever zingers, he'll look good in comparison. Because the problem a lot of conservatives have with Trump is that they liked his policies, but they didn't like his behavior. And right. His behavior isn't changing. Now, he can show, as he did over the weekend, immense crowds. And no one else will get those crowds like that. But no one else has been on the scene for, 8 years now? Right. So he's a showman, remember? And he had a top-rated show on NBC. Ron DeSantis is a governing person. He's been very effective governing, but that's not dramatic. You need to make an argument about that because people don't see explosions and fireworks.
Right. Right. No, you're right. You're exactly right about that. And so that's the reason why you build the organizations, why you build a field organization, because it's not all about debates. It's also about going door to door, knocking on doors, talking to people and convincing them to come along with you. And that goes a long way in places like Iowa and New Hampshire. And right now, Trump has got, for some reason, a feud with Kim Reynolds, who's a very popular Republican governor in Iowa, and it's likely to do him some damage there. And basically, my point is, we're not even started yet. I mean, everybody's just really preparing right now.
Yeah. And it's practice. Yeah. This media things are practice. And it's good practice for DeSantis. He did Maria, and he got tough questions. He handled them. And now it'll happen some more. And at some point, somebody in some scrum in New Hampshire is going to say, "Well, what's the price of milk in Florida?" And he doesn't know it. Or what's the name of the Pakistan prime minister? He doesn't know it. And the media will have a field day with it. It won't matter because no president needs to know everything. That's why they have staff in the White House. So debates, in my mind, they've become show business. They're not a measure. They're not a measure of anything, but they are the way people judge. So you gotta perform, and that's what it is—a performance.
All right, I don't want to let you go without talking about your latest column, I should say, over at Red State, and your latest Malcolm on the Right. Seismic changes are rocking the American workplace.
Yeah. Yeah, there's now, they've got some studies now, and I was stunned by the number of, I won't give everything away, but the number of employers is over half who are considering 4-day work weeks. Now it might be 4 10-day work weeks. And I always said I would work 4 12-hour days to have 3 whole days off. That's fine with me as long as you're at work. What's another 3 hours? But I was stunned that so many are considering it. And of course, there's still, I guess, roughly half the white collar workers who are working away from the office at least part of the time. Companies are having a devil of a time to bring them back in. Understandably, people don't want to have the commuting charges and the stress, and it has economic impact on where offices are, restaurants, lunchtime places, parking, buses, subways, everything. If you're not traveling, they lose business. So there's I called it in the head seismic. There's a seismic shift going on, and I wasn't aware of it, so I shared that on the audio.
Well, and I agree. And there was something from The Economist today too. Actually, it wasn't from today; it was from last week, and I just didn't catch up to it till today. But saying that studies are now showing that, guess what? People are more efficient when they're actually in the office as opposed to remote working. So I think that there's going to be a lot of churn on this question. There
was also a study company said, well, how could we make the workplace less stressful and more productive? And by far, the number one issue was meetings. Useless meetings. Just 9 out of 10 meetings are not necessary. It's somebody showing off how much work they did to look good in the meetings, and everyone's sitting there wishing they were back at work or playing on their cell phone.
I used to call the weekly staff meetings the weekly confessional back in the day. It was so bad when I worked at a Fortune 100 company whose name I will not say. They actually had one year, this program, this training program, in which we were empowered to say that the meeting was not worth our time. If we didn't get an agenda ahead of time, we were empowered to tell even our bosses, I'm not going to attend the meeting. Now that didn't actually happen in real life, but Honeywell, sorry. Yeah, that was a company. All right. It was Honeywell. At least recognized the problem, right? Which was that they were having too damn many meetings and which were useless. We were having meetings to set up meetings. That's how useless. The pre-meeting meeting. It was just terrible. And at least Honeywell, I'll say the name since I blurted it out. At least they recognized the issue. And I got to tell you, even though it was probably not a successful effort, I think most of us appreciated the fact that they at least tried.
Yeah, absolutely.
It did have some impact. We actually started getting agendas ahead of time, and it wasn't a question of malice. It's just a question of bad habits.
And it's easy, and you could send an email to accomplish that.
Right, exactly. And a lot of times you just could do it one-on-one. You didn't need a whole room full of people. You just talk one-on-one with people and get the information. So yeah, sometimes meetings are useful. A lot of times not. All right.
That's what I like to say in crowded elevators when we're between floors. They say, well, I suppose you're all wondering why I asked you here.
That's how long meetings should last too, actually.
Yeah.
Really quickly, arming Ukraine with U.S. cluster bombs reveals more than Joe Biden wanted. I'm of two minds on this. I think that reciprocity is important in warfare, in actual warfare. And if one side's using them, then that side should expect to get them in return. On the other hand, the justification that the U.S. is using is something that a lot of countries are going to copy when they start deploying these munitions. It's not a great situation here.
No, it's not. It's the thing that struck me, and I wrote about it in the column too, was how we get so picayune about how we go about killing people. killing people by the hundreds is okay. But when you use a cluster bomb, that's too many at once. Gas, we can't use poisonous gas. The main reason is people say it's bad, but the main reason is the wind can bring it back on you. So that's not so smart. And the nuclear weapons, that's why I said in the column, it's become a threat. But the reality is, and maybe I said this here once before, the reality is that more Japanese were killed in the firebombing of Tokyo than were killed in the 2 atomic bomb flashes. But napalm is okay, but atomic weapons, oh, well, that's not so good. So to get fussy about how you're killing people, okay? And you're killing them in large numbers, and that's the point. Who was it, George Patton, who said the point is not to die for your country. The point is to get the other guy to die for his country.
Right.
And so Russia started using cluster bombs. I think the Ukraine has used some of them, and maybe they bought them from somebody. But the U.S. now is sending them over. But the secret thing is that the U.S. is sending them over because we don't have enough of the 155 millimeter shells to send. So we're going to send the cluster bombs that we're not using, and which that looks good, and we can help Ukraine, and that'll kill a lot of people. And it's not us using them, which is another one of those phony things. Well, I just handed him the gun. He did the shooting. It's pathetic. But it shows that we have, remember Joe Biden and the supply chain that he supposedly fixed? Our manufacturing processes are way behind the times. And I think they probably have started by now, but to start remaking more javelins, because we've run down our supplies of Javelin anti-tank missiles, that takes 2 years to gear up all the subcontractors and to start making them. And you don't turn them out by the hour. It might be 1 or 2 a day, something like that, because these are complicated things. And each one of the Javelins takes 200 computer chips. So you got to find them. And they get vaporized when the thing goes off. It's a very effective weapon. So we're kind of up a creek here, and nobody has done anything about it. And boy, if you think Joe Biden's going to do it, watching, no, he's not Prince Charles anymore, watching King Charles guide him around the honor guard today, that was so sad.
That's sad.
Yeah, it's elder abuse. It's plain and simple.
Yep, I agree. All right. With that said, we got to get to the jokes of the day because we can talk
have some.
All right, let's hear them.
These are old. Conan said President Obama is in Italy, where he praised Italians for being great allies. He went on to say, except, of course, for any time we've ever been at war with each other.
Yeah.
And Jay Leno, he said, bad news for the Lone Ranger movie. The movie could lose more than $150 million. In fact, it's so bad that Tonto has quit acting and has gone back to working in the casino. And let's see, this one, I like this one. Jay Leno, he says, Democrats are warning that if the debt ceiling isn't raised, the federal government will cease to function. How do you tell?
Yeah, exactly.
Remember President Coolidge was so taciturn, and they said, oh, he's passed away. And there was some writer in the New Yorker who said, how do you tell? Yeah.
Yeah.
He's not talking anymore. Yeah.
I got one for you.
Okay.
Because I told a couple earlier today. They weren't good ones, but I told a couple of them. But I'll give you one here, and I'll give you the shorter one that I have here. So one day, a professor of psychology was greeting his new college class, and he stood up in front of the class and said, Would everyone who thinks that he or she is stupid please stand up? And a minute goes by, silence. Nobody does anything. And then finally, one young man stands up. And the professor says, well, good morning to you. So you actually think you're a moron? And the student says, well, no, sir. I just really didn't want to see you standing there all by yourself. All right, jokesoftheday.net. I get them from jokesoftheday.net just because
I have one more. Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a Ronald Reagan joke. This is a Ronald Reagan treasure. He said, have you heard this story? Remember the way he always started?
Yes, yes,
he said, so the Democrats had a convention. And when they came out, there was a little kid selling kittens, tiny kittens, to the Democrats. And some of them were sold. And a couple of weeks later, Republicans had a convention in the same place. And Republicans came out, and there was the same kid selling little kittens a couple of weeks later. And a reporter went over to the kid and said, well, I saw you selling them to Democrats before, and now you're trying to sell them to Republicans now. And the kid said, well, yeah, now their eyes are open.
I did not see that coming.
Yeah, I know. That was the beauty of Reagan's joke. That's why I saved it. Yeah.
That is awesome. All right. Yeah. Well, and you're awesome too. You are the prince of Twitter, the regent of redstate.com. At AH Malcolm on Twitter is where you can find Andrew. And we're here every single week, except when I'm gold bricking, which I will be the end of this month and the beginning of next. So I'll be off for 2 weeks. But other than that, he's here every week, even if I'm not. Yeah, I know.
What is that? Finished painting?
The Scream. Munch by Munch. Yeah, The Scream. Yeah, that's... Yeah, I'll be taking a couple of weeks off, but I'll be here next week. So we'll do this next week, and then after that.
All right. Good enough. All right. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you then.
See you then.